In the heart of Migori County, a wisp of smoke curls skyward. Ghostly, hesitant, yet laden with promise. This is no ordinary factory exhaust. It is a flicker of hope in a region that has endured silence of machines, of wages, of livelihoods. For months, silence ruled. Crushing ceased. Paychecks dried up. We journeyed across the sugar belt, from the misty slopes of Mount Elgon to the sun-sparkled shores of Lake Victoria. What we sought wasn't just smoke, but its color. The true signal of a sugar mill reborn is grayish-white, gentle, consistent, industrious. Here in Awendo town, one boiler roared back to life. Bagasse, the dry cane residue, fed the flames. Workers, still unpaid, toiled. In Sony, at least a spark has returned, but the road ahead is steep. This region, its fields, its families, await the steady rhythm of industry. Jane Pamela Odhiambo, popularly known as JP, is the newly appointed Managing Director of Sony Sugar 2025. She explains that the mill has begun receiving deliveries once again from outgrowers, independent farmers who had long awaited this moment with bated breath.
They have already given us about 3,500 tons of cane as at end of day yesterday, and more cane is coming in. So we have enough cane to run the mill.
Sony, now under the stewardship of Busia Sugar Industry, had remained shut for 2.5 months. Its reopening, though shrouded in symbolic white smoke, remains tentative, awaiting the moment when symbolism gives way to substance.
There are weaknesses in the cane stackers, in the loading cranes, going into the cane carrier. There are weaknesses there. There are weaknesses in the mills. There are weaknesses in the boiler. The boiler area. In fact, the boiler area needs an investment of another boiler so that much more power is produced.
The story is no different from the other state-owned sugar mills scattered across Bungoma and Kisumu counties. One by one, they fell silent. Muhoroni Sugar Company, the country's pioneer miller, now stands as a monument to decay. Years of neglect have allowed vegetation to sprout from its rooftops. So large are the gaping holes on its roofs that workers, it is said, once huddled under umbrellas when it rained. When we arrived at the factory, the silence was deafening. No smoke, no rumble. Only the clang of sledgehammers and the hiss of welding torches broke the stillness as repairs continued in earnest.
We have gone through a lot. You find the boilers are old, the tubes, the pipes are worn out. By the time we were shutting down the plant, we were having tube leakages every other day. You start the plant, after one day there's a leakage, you shut down the whole plant to repair it.
We are looking at spending about more than 300 to 350 million in terms of rehabilitating this machine. That is what we are putting in currently for it to start running. Long term is to put a new mill. And if we are saying we are going to put a new mill, a normal mill of 2,500 TCD will go to about 4 to 5 billion shillings. So this is also another investment which we are also looking at putting up in future if all things goes as we are planning.
West Valley Sugar, the new lessee at Muhoroni Sugar Company, aims to commence cane crushing anytime soon to unlock financing. Yet, the road ahead is bumpy. Some machinery still relies on spare parts that were last produced in 1964, long obsolete and nearly impossible to source.
In mills here, we have bearings costing over 2 million. One, And you will find that we are running with the 24 bearings at the same time. You can imagine how much that man is. And he's bringing in all that.
Just next door lies yet another ISO, Chemelil Sugar Company. Here too, the tale of rot echoes through rusted iron sheets, while antiquated, weary machines whisper of a forgotten past. The scene is steeped in sorrow, each creaking bolt a lament. Jacob Agoch, the transitional advisor for the lessee, Kibos Sugar and Allied Industries, speaks of a factory teetering on the very edge of ruin.
The external structure in terms of the building is in dire state and needs quite uplifting so that we even the basic level safeguard the equipments. If you look at the roofs of the plant, it's holes all over and leakage. That means when it's raining, then even the equipments within the plant is being exposed to water.
In Bungoma County, Nzoia Sugar's chimneys also remained dormant. The new operator, West Kenya, is undertaking a complete overhaul. A reconstruction phase before cane deliveries resume.
Most of the items at this factory, being a 78 factory, most of the items are gotten from abroad. So we have seen already that is being undertaken by the new investor, and it has been a journey, because when you look at even what they had quoted for this factory in terms of the initial investment, they had quoted 5.7 billion. That is massive, because if you look at a new plant today, a new plant would cost maybe around 3 to 4 billion, but he's putting in another 5.7 billion to be able to bring this factory to the efficiencies which are required.
Infrastructure and machines aside, another vital domain that calls for the investor's swift intervention is cane development. For a sugar factory to hum with life and operate at full capacity, it must draw upon the bounty of at least 29,000 hectares of land, stretching across both nuclear estates and the patchwork of outgrower farms. Cane cultivation is a labor of sweat and soil, a demanding endeavor where every inefficiency, be it the careless mingling of earth with the crop, adds weight to the burden of cost.
They had the nuclear farms which were not well managed. They were able to supply maybe 20 to 30% to the mill. Most of the other 70% was supplied by the farmers. But we also want to try to see if even we can supply 60 to 70% from the nuclear farm by doing the modern ways of farming. So we have now started putting fertilizer, weeding the farm, spraying herbicides, so that at least you can rehabilitate the farm.
Currently, the nuclears provide us with around 25% of our input, and the 75 to 80% is coming from our outgrowers. So we are putting a lot of focus more in our outgrowers in terms of how can they improve the yield, how can they have continuous supply of cane.
This widespread distress, exacerbated by years of mismanagement, rampant looting and relentless political meddling, now haunts the 4 state-owned sugar companies, recently leased to private operators.
The other biggest problem which these mills had was the recovery. Because of the old machines, the recovery, actually we found that the last recovery for Moroni was 5.6, which is very low, because the required is about 9 to 10. Currently in West Valley, we are doing about 8.5 to 9%. So you can see also where they are losing their money. So that is also most of the inefficiencies which were there on these mills, which needs to be sorted out so that at least they can be able to make money and you look at it as a business.
When President William Ruto visited Nzoia Sugar Factory in Bungoma County earlier this year, he recounted a pattern that had become painfully familiar throughout his political journey, first as Agriculture Minister under President Mwai Kibaki, then as Deputy President under Uhuru Kenyatta, and now as Head of State.
The recent competitive leasing of 4 state-owned factories, Nzoia, Chemelil, Sony, and Moroni, is another strategic step to inject efficiency, restore profitability, and safeguard farmers' livelihoods. Our goal is to modernize the mills, ensure prompt payment to farmers, workers' salaries and wages, and transform these once struggling factories into productive and sustainable enterprises.
True to his word, the president initiated the leasing process, though the contracts now extend for 30 years rather than the initially proposed 25. Under the new management, Muhoroni and Chemelil in Kisumu County have been leased to West Valley and Kibos Sugar, respectively. Nzoia Sugar in Bungoma is now under the management of the Rai family's West Kenya Sugar Company. West Kenya owns Naitiri in Bungoma, Kabras in Kakamega, and Olepito in Busia. Sony Sugar, on the other hand, has been leased out to Busia Sugar Industries. Yet, pivotal questions remain unanswered. What exactly do these lease agreements contain? Why have they not been made public? At the end of the 30-year lease period, will names like Nzoia, Sony, and Muhoroni still endure?
I think we're done in-house. No matter what they tell us, they have refused to show us the lease. What does the lease read? If you ask me, I don't know. Because as farmers, we had no idea about it.
The way it was done is the problem, because we're not involved as farmers, and we're the main stakeholders.
There's no transparency, there was no discussion with the leadership, we have no idea, and yet we are the ones who are representing the people on the ground.
This thing is surrounded by a lot of secrecy. We don't know how the list looks like, we don't know what it contains, and with that, this leadership here are totally against that list.
My biggest fear is that some people somewhere want to use this process, this process to push the border by bringing some communities to take land that belongs to us.
Among the many thorny issues that continue to stir unease around the tightly held lease agreement, none is more charged than the question of land, a subject as old and sacred as the soil itself. Farmers and communities living in the shadow of the mills are left wrestling with the unanswered questions such as, how much are the lessees paying for the land?
We are the owners of the land. Why did you participate? Did you participate? That means that was illegal. What are we called?
There is a claim that investors basically have been eyeing the lands more than anything else. Yeah, because government factories, Miwani, Muhoroni, Chemelil, Nzoia, Sony, they are the only people with the nucleus, huge lands.
In this lease, the land is not being sold to anybody. The land still belongs to the government. It has only been leased for those 30 years. Yeah? The ownership has not changed. So nobody should say that now the land has been given to Busia Sugar Industry. They are just leasing for operation purposes. And for your information, also the land, the lessee is paying lease for that land. Yeah. So, and that is in the agreement.
Curiously, farmers and workers have yet to be compensated by the government as outlined in the agreement. By the time the government leased the 4 sugar companies to private millers, the mills collectively owed farmers a staggering sum of 1.7 billion shillings. Of this, Sony accounted for more than half, with arrears amounting to over 800 million shillings. Muhoroni Sugar owed in excess of 300 million shillings, while Nzoia Sugar had an outstanding dues totaling to 274 million shillings. Chemelil, on its part, carried arrears amounting to more than 263 million shillings.
It's not only farmers but also employees. We have employees' debt of around 2.3 billion, which has accumulated for a period of about 25 months. So we had negotiated this with the government. The government had accepted that they are going to pick this debt.
But that promise by the government remains only partially fulfilled. Kasumuel Ooko, who has tended his sugarcane fields for 5 long years, reveals that he has little to show for his hard labor, apart from frustration and dwindling hope.
Kuwa na shida ya kulipwa. Unapeleka miwa yako inakaa huko kwa zaidi ya mwezi 6, saa zingine hata mwaka moja kabla hujalipwa. Na hiyo unajua ndio income ya mtu ya kawaida. Sasa baada ya kutumia pesa yako unapeleka miwa na inachukua hiyo muda yote, it really discourages.
Another group still awaiting their dues from the government comprises the long-suffering employees of the leased mills. Though the state had pledged to settle their dues, that promise has remained silent. However, that silence was recently broken when frustration reached boiling point and the unpaid workers, wearied by years of neglect, brought operations at the mills to a grinding halt, demanding the wages long denied to them and the dignity that comes with honest labor.
We need to know how are these workers going to be paid their salary arrears before the issue of leasing. The companies should not be leased before workers are paid their arrears. And we shall not allow leasing if there is no clear roadmap on how workers are going to be paid their arrears.
Still, there remains yet another group of disgruntled stakeholders, those who call themselves the Forgotten Lot. Among them is Edan Hamed Abdil, a voice echoing the frustrations of many.
Let me speak on their behalf.
Edan says that as customers, their plight was never considered in the lease agreement, overlooked as though invincible. Yet he argues, and not without reason, that without their support, the sugar industry will be as good as dead.
We paid for sugar in advance. We were clients from different walks of life, shopkeepers, wholesalers, retailers, distributors.
The Migori-based entrepreneur claims that Sony owes them over 350 million shillings, a debt now shrouded in uncertainty after it was perhaps fatefully omitted from the lease agreement. He fears it may never be repaid, lost like a shadow in the folds of oversight.
I'm asking, where is our money? We need our money back. We need our money back in the form of sugar. We don't want cash. We need our money back in form of sugar. And we need the earliest possible because our business are suffering. Our business are suffering and it affects across South Nyanza, across Western Kenya.
Government was supposed to pay all these other liabilities which were pending bills. And there are many. I just said there are about 6 billion. Yeah? So that 6 billion, apart from the farmers' arrears and staff arrears, it also has suppliers. Yeah? Other suppliers, like for example, KPLC. KPLC here is owed to close to 13 million shillings. Yeah? So those ones are pending bills that the government is supposed to be paying.
But the issue of the forward sales maybe was not captured in one way or another. And we are still aligning with the transition committee. There is a transition committee which has been formed, which we are still sitting together to align and see how these forward sales will be paid. One funny thing is the people who have done these forward sales are customers who we also expect to sell them sugar. And it is really something which has to be sorted by government. And we really urge the government maybe to come forth and give a clear indication of how these forward sales can be able to be paid.
When we came in, the forward sale is at around 157 million Kenya shillings. So, and on that we are discussing with the government through the transitional committee, they requested us to consider taking up that liability, but going back to the lease agreement, it was clear that we came in to pick the plant from where it is.
Kenya's past flirtation with privatization has often favored a well-connected elite, birthing billionaires while leaving communities impoverished, a phenomenon widely described as crony capitalism. It is not the first time the reins of state-owned sugar factories have been handed to private investors, including foreign multinationals. After independence and faced with growing demand for sugar and the inability of the two Asian-owned mills, that is Miwani in Kisumu and Ramisi in Kwale, to meet national needs, the government plunged into the sugar industry. The outcome was disastrous.
Corruption, mismanagement are really the cause of the downfall of the government-owned factory. Remember, Nzoia was government. Mumias was private, but Miwani was private. The other one at the coast was also private. But in the end, when corruption set in, they all collapsed.
Even though the state later loosened its grip on pricing, it still retained ownership of most of the factories. Upon realizing the mills were spiraling toward ruin, the government turned to the private sector, hoping to breathe life into the fading industry with a promise of efficiency. But even this infusion could not stem the decline due to constant interference.
We set up Sugar Board early in 2002 to see if we could regulate the industry. But still, government will not leave Sugar Board alone. I was a director at Sugar Board, and still the ministry wanted to run Sugar Board.
In a desperate attempt to save Miwani Sugar Company, the state entered into a public-private partnership with the late Ketan Somaya, a suave, persuasive Kisumu-based businessman. Somaya is alleged to have acquired a controlling 51% stake in the company without paying a shilling. He would later flee to Dubai, leaving behind 2 billion shillings in debts to creditors and another 500 million shillings owed to farmers. His departure sparked a protracted legal and financial quagmire, ensuring Miwani's once thriving mill remains mute to this day.
It is very painful. The first factory in Kenya, which was started in 1912, is going down. But Miwani is the most potential sugar factory in the country because it's a 10,000 arable land for sugarcane development. Which one do you need?
The case of Miwani is classic. You are a journalist and who knows the case. That's just a case of fraud.
Elsewhere, the Meta Group International, which had been contracted to manage Sony and Muhoroni, exited abruptly, never to return, even when invited years later. Mumias Sugar, once the crown jewel of Kenya's sugar sector, was floated on the Nairobi Securities Exchange in 2001 after the government divested 80% of its shares to the public. It quickly sank into debt. Its machines fell silent in 2017, and by September 2019, it was placed under receivership by Kenya Commercial Bank over unpaid liabilities. A protracted legal contest ensued following the placement of the country's largest sugar miller under receivership.
Investigative audit is necessary, despite what has happened about so-called privatization, which we can get into. But surely an investigative audit, even perhaps a commission of inquiry, is necessary to establish what happened to the sugar industry in this country. An industry that is productive of wealth, an industry that can industrialize this country because of its multi-product dimension. Because the sugar industry is not just about sugar. It produces many more things. It can produce alcohol, through ethanol. It can produce power.
When cane is crushed, the dry pulp that is left once the juice has been extracted, or bagasse, is pushed into the boilers, where it is heated under high temperatures. This in turn heats water whose steam is eventually used to make electricity to power the factory and the plant. This method of producing electricity using bagasse is known as cogeneration. With adequate electricity due to adequate cane, a miller can produce surplus electricity which can then be sold to the national grid.
Immediately we start the production and kick on the process. Then we will look into immediate and hanging fruits which we can really invest on quickly, with an objective of optimizing our productivity and profit, and also reducing our operational cost. So along the way, we will consider going into cogen, we will consider going into ethanol and all those other industries around the sugar sector.
This was Mumias Sugar's game plan, with this 35 megawatt bagasse-based cogeneration plant that saw it enter an agreement with Kenya Power to supply the power distributor with electricity. However, this was disrupted after the miller ran out of bagasse due to reduced cane supply. The low-hanging fruit for most of the new sugar barons is the production of ethanol, an industry that has been dominated by agrochemical and food company, a state-owned distillery.
Most of these factories that are leasing are already having their own distilleries. What therefore happens to the agrochemicals? So where are these workers that are agrochemical going to go? Moroni will have nowhere for their workers to go.
In its raw form, molasses may be used to sweeten animal feed or produce fertilizers. However, it is predominantly converted into ethanol, which is then distilled into spirits such as whiskey, gin, or rum by compounders. Rye Group, which already has an iron grip control over refined sugar, through its 5 subsidiaries, has now set its eyes on the byproducts of cane, particularly cogeneration and ethanol production.
Sugarcane is just now a byproduct. In the mainstream, when we are talking about ethanol, which is the in thing, we are talking about distillery. We are talking about power generation from this bagasse. Now, those are the kind of opportunities that are coming. But you see, change is not instantaneous, it is very gradual.
For anyone who has ever peeled a stalk of fresh cane and bitten into its fibrous core, the initial sensation is unmistakable. A burst of nature's unadulterated sweetness. That sweetness, it is sucrose, nature's energy storehouse and mankind's treasured sweetener for centuries. While sucrose exists in most plants, only sugarcane and sugar beet yield it in commercially viable concentrations. In Kenya, sugar beet is not cultivated. The nation's entire output comes from sugarcane. Sugar production is thus a delicate dance, a measure of how well the farmer grows cane rich in sucrose and how efficiently the mill extracts it. Ideally, cane should contain 13 to 14% sucrose, and a proficient mill should recover at least 98% of this precious sweetness.
We don't only get sucrose from sugarcane. We have the molasses. We have the bagasse. All this we can earn as a farmer out of those other products. We have never been given that. There is also manure from the same sugarcane. With the millers, they carry them to their farms. But with us as farmers, like my farm where I'm supposed to till it now, I need such manure and they cannot give me.
Indeed, for up to 24 months, farmers toil over their cane, clearing land, weeding, fertilizing, guarding against thieves, and finally, transporting their harvest to the factory gates.
If you add all these things, they're about 100,000 shillings to develop 1 acre of cane. But as a farmer, what do I get? I get 20 tons out of 1 acre. These 20 tons, the net I get is 4,000. 4,000 over 20 is 80,000. I spent 100,000 shillings. Now I'm getting 80,000 shillings at the end of all my effort. That means the plant crop, the farm is coming out with nil.
This unfortunate situation is particularly dire for small-scale growers, many of whom are unable to even deliver their cane to the weighbridge, either due to lack of transport, interference from middlemen, or outright rejection by millers. As a result, these farmers are compelled to accept whatever payment offered, if at all, thus perpetuating a relentless cycle of exploitation and impoverishment in cane-growing regions.
Payment period. We expect that once my cane has ended on the weighbridge, I should also having money cash with me. But it takes even 1 week or 2 weeks when you are now paid. Now, yet the cane had been crushed and they had received their sucrose.
In fact, there was a time when even kids could not go to school because you put all your hope in the sugarcane. After being harvested, it stays there for a year or for 6 months. The child is at home. Then it means automatically the child will quit the school.
Poor state of roads have exacerbated the problem. Hezron Kotut, the managing director Nzoia Sugar, notes that transport costs account for up to 40% of a farmer's total production expenses. Although the government has removed 16% value-added tax on transport, the high cost remains.
So you'll find that in one hand, yes, you're telling that we are going to zero rate this, but in the other hand, taxes in terms of importing even these pears that we are getting them from abroad, you'll find that we don't have those tax exemptions. So it is a big issue. And when you looked at millers, when you calculate your transport cost, then basically you are not getting anything back that you can pass it over to the farmer.
Further worsening the industries whose are illegal, cheap imports, facilitated by weak regulations and rampant corruption. For years, the government has attempted to shield the industry through frequent bailouts for the state-owned mills, all the while protecting them from competition within the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, a 21-member free trade area. These bailouts have drained taxpayer funds, while the COMESA safeguards intended to shield domestic industries have hurt consumers. However, Bernard Soy, managing director of West Valley, contends that cheap imports have done little to reduce the retail price of sugar.
Even this importation of sugar is not an easy thing, because you go and get sugar from another country, you go through taxes in the country. By the moment it comes to the country and you start selling the sugar, it is really not cost effective at some point.
The collapse of the sugar industry, along with other key sectors such as cotton and paper during the 1990s, dealt a crushing blow to the economy of Western Kenya, plunging thousands into even deeper poverty. By the late 1990s, Mumias Sugar Company, which had once supported over 100,000 farmers and indirectly impacted nearly 2 million people, was struggling with payment delays stretching over 6 months. Nevertheless, some industry stakeholders are still steadfast in their belief that sugarcane remains the most viable source of employment, more so due to its expansive supply chain, which encompasses transporters, weeders, cutters, and factory workers. Once a bustling trading center, Mayoni town, nestled in the heart of western Kenya and just a stone's throw from Mumias Sugar Company, is now clocked in eerie silence. Faded rooftops, dilapidated houses with rusty padlocks dangling from their doors, and residents clinging to just a spoonful of hope underscore the somber mood here. This town, located along the Mumias-Bungoma Road and at the junction of Mumias-Busia Road, once danced in rhythm with the males at the Mumias Sugar Factory, whispering songs of a thriving industry.
Mayoni ilikuwa kubwa na tulikuwa na transporters wa miwa kama tulikuwa na CSC hapa, tulikuwa na kuna mga alikuwa anaitwa Makahan, kuna mga alikuwa anaitwa Dedra, wote walikuwa naishi hapa. Mayoni ilikuwa soko kubwa sana.
Gorofa ndio hii hapa. Hiyo ndio ilikuwa baya kwanza Mayoni. Ile kubwa kabisa. Watu wakishuka kutoka Bukas wapi wanaingia hapo. Lakini ukienda hata unaweza shangaa na hii ilikuwa baya ama ni nini? Yes, inafanya but haifanyi the way ilikuwa inafanya kitambo.
Ingine kama gorofa. Hiyo ilikuwa ni jina yake.
Ilikuwa nini? Gorofa. Alafu kama Bombax huko. Nayo iko msituni, yes. But wateja hawako the way walikuanga kitambo.
Mayoni, once vibrant and alive, a place where the sugar trade sweetened not only the air but also the fortunes of its people, now stands as a pale shadow of its former self. The heartbeat of the town faltered when Mumias Sugar Company, once the pride of the region, staggered and fell under the weight of turmoil.
Hata mboga, mama mboga akileta mboga, ilikuwa akileta mboga inanunuliwa kwa urahisi. Lakini saizi mama mboga akileta mboga inakaa wiki, mwisho wake inaoza na mwaga kule. Na wakati ule sisi tulikuwa tutoki hapa kusafiri kwenda mbali. Saizi watoto wetu wanatoka hapa kwenda kufanya umaid Nairobi. Mtoto amemaliza form 4 tena unapata ameenda kuwa maid.
When the factory's fires dimmed, so too did the lights in countless businesses here. Bars, hotels, restaurants, each folded in sorrow, one after another. Retail shops watched their shelves gather dust. Landlords, burdened by years of empty tenements, tore down the very homes they once built in hope.
Wakati kazi iliisha, watu walirudi manyumbani, wengine walienda kutafuta kazi nje. Hasa hapa watu wenye wako hapa labda ni wa within tu. Wengi walirudi marisafu.
With job losses came hunger. With hunger came desperation. The employees who escaped the axe found themselves unpaid, forgotten in the long corridors of bureaucracy. And so, as families moved away and investors pulled out, unemployment soared, and so did crime.
Sasa hapa hivi Mayoni ni kubaya mazee. Vijana watulii, mashughuli sasa ni kuiba. Sasa hakuna kazi ya kufanya, utafanya kazi gani?
Sasa hii watu hawana kazi, hakuna kitu tunafanya. Tunaweza shinda the whole day tumekaa tu tunapiga mdomo. Wengi wasichana wengi vulana wengi walienda shule. Hata kwa kampuni sasa hii wakienda hakuna job opportunity sababu ni kidogo.
Even the smallest traders, the unsung lifeblood of this town, feels the sting of neglect. Without disposable incomes, customers disappeared like the morning mist.
Ukiangalia hata tangu nikae hapa pengine hata sijauza. Unaweza kuwa hata na customer mmoja ama wawili kwa siku. Ama hata ukose, unaona.
Several kilometers away in Nzoia, still in western Kenya, we find Nandolia Trading Center. Here, we meet Benson Onyango, a cobbler, seated quietly under his dusty stall, surrounded by a heap of old, worn-out shoes. He tells us that most of the shoes belong to customers who have been unable to collect them due to financial reasons.
Ilikuwa ukishona na mnamalizana, hata mtu anakaa tu anangoja. Lakini siku hizi vile mtu anakuambia shona nimengoja huku kitu kidogo, hiyo wakati inapita na pia anaacha tu. Hasi itapita aidha umpea tumia atakupea ama ikae tu hapo.
Benson has seen Nandolia rise with the sun, and now he watches it sink into shadows. The smoke that once rose from Nzoia Sugar's chimneys was more than just smoke. It was life for this town and its occupants.
Watu walikuwa wanafanya kazi, wanapata pesa, biashara inaendelea hapa, hata hapo biashara ilikuwa inafanyika hapa huko. Watu wako na wamerenti nyumba wanakaa hapa wengi. Sasa hii hata ukienda kwa hizi nyumba hakuna watu, hakuna wafanyakazi hapa, hakuna biashara hapa.
As we take a stroll around the center, we notice several obsolete structures lying abandoned and almost collapsing. A couple of blocks away from Benson's stall, we spot this building bearing the writings Nzoia Investment Cooperative Society. Inside, we meet Melvin Kahoya. Melvin tells us that this was once their pride. Sugarcane farmers of Nzoia established this supermarket full of dreams of prosperity.
We were running properly until 2017 when problems started cropping up. Nzoia Sugar could recover salaries from employees and failed to remit. So when they failed to remit, then it became difficult for us to run.
The society bled money and was forced to shut down everything: the fuel pump, the shops, even the hope the members once held.
As I speak, they still owe us a lot of money. They have money in the tune of 10 million by 2017.
Meet Emily Akinyi, a seasoned tailor in Chemelil town, tucked in the heart of Kisumu County. For 28 years, this humble veranda, sheltered from the sun by weathered and rusty iron sheets, has been her workspace. Emily is one of the many locals who have watched Chemelil's star rise in brilliance only to fade into quiet twilight.
Pesa ilikuwa inaflow na butchery zilikuwa nyingi sana sana, mabaa na maduka zilikuwa zimejaa sana.
Another figure whose presence in this sugar town almost rivals that of Emily is Judith Wameyo. For close to 2 decades, Judith has made her living selling charcoal, a humble yet enduring trade. Like Emily, she bore witness to Chemelil's rise, watching its fortunes blossom with promise, only to see them wither and fall before our very eyes.
Maduka mingi zimefungwa, inafaa ikuwe juu. Hata watu wa mabucha wamefunga, yani sema tu watu wa biashara wengi wamefunga kwa sababu hakuna pesa. Mtu kama mwenye anafanya kwa bucha anaweza chinja ng'ombe auze even for 3 days inaharibika. Sasa wameamua kuacha. Center iko chini sana, yani wacha tu nisitumie lugha, imekufa.
But for Edward Onyango, the memories of the good old days remain etched deep in his mind, indelible, untouched by time. Not even the dying gasp of Chemelil town can erase the warm glow of nostalgia that still flickers in his heart.
Na zamani hizo ilikuwa pesa iko hapa kama njugu. Kwa maana malipo ilikuwa mzuri wakati wa Wasongo. Malipo ilikuwa juu, biashara ilikuwa na waka hapa kweli kweli. Kuona hii barabara ilikuwa na waka paka Muroni. Watu walikunywa pombe paka barabara kutoka hii Lamu. Lamu ilikuwa mzuri. Wanatoka hapa paka Kisumu wanakuja kunywa pande. Ilikuwa safe place.
That was then. Today, Chemelil stands as a quiet shadow of its former self, a scattering of weather-beaten structures lining dusty roads where weary families struggle each day to make that ever-elusive coin. Oukokusa, NTV.